So the question of our next session is, what does good look like and how do we get there? We've got three people who know a little bit about this when it comes to banking. Andrew Black from Connect ID is set to become Australia's first digital identity exchange, allowing citizens to take more control over their identity and data, enabling organisations to unlock value and secure security risks. He's an established leader in the digital identity industry, working with state and federal governments here in Australia, along with international bodies, to shape the future technology evolutions and help protect citizen data rights. I reckon he's got the dirt on what's going on because I'm mad keen to hear all about it. So please put your hands together. Welcome Andrew to the stage. Joining him is Nicholas Harrop from NAB and Jason from Hold Access. Yes, because I did have Catherine. I just realised I forgot to check the updates on this one. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together. Welcome our panel to talk about the best practice about the digital ID, and hopefully we'll have a set date sometime soon on when we get one. Over to you. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. I've scared you off already. Gents, thanks for joining me. Jason, do you want to introduce yourself as well? Since you're a last-minute late addition. Do you want to say hi? Introduce yourself, who you are.
Jason Urunjola Davis. I'm from Darwin, and my company is Hold Access. We have Wana as our software, and we serve identification for the underserved and those who are underdocumented, helping them to access identification and their digital electronic credentials from anywhere with or without the internet.
Sorry, Nick, you got the run-up already, so thank you. Fairly weighty topic to discuss. So with a sort of short window, let's dive right in. Somebody reminded me actually last week that it's been almost 40 years since we rejected fairly firmly an Australia card. 10 years since MyGov, and sort of 6 years since a drafted digital identity framework was put in place. So we've been talking about this for a while. First question, why do we keep talking about it? And Nick, I guess for you maybe to kick off, when we talk about digital identity, what does that mean for you and what are sort of the benefits?
Yeah, 40 years is really surprising. I was thinking it was nearer to 20, but it shows how old I am too. We're talking about it because it's still a problem. Identification digitally that is simple and secure and can scale hasn't been solved. And we're talking about it because people realise that protecting their data, their information, the aspects of their identity is really important and getting more important. We're talking about it because fraudsters and scammers also realise that it's really important. But we haven't been talking about the same thing for 40 years. The conversation has matured, the solutions are maturing, technology is maturing. The basic problem though is still really, really simple. A 100-point ID scheme was designed before the turn of the last century. It wasn't designed for a reality that we see today. And, the easiest way to describe the problem statement is if on Friday night, after a fantastic week at Intersekt and others, I'm going to have some sushi and order some sake and have it home delivered, why? Why am I telling or proving to my local delivery driver that effectively I can drive a car? And then why on earth are they taking a record of this when all they need to know is that I'm over 18? I'm also asking, well then, what is happening with this data? How, as an individual, do I know what it's being used for, how it's being stored, and ultimately, is it safe? But then there's the other side. As a business, how, as a business, am I going to keep it safe? How much is it going to cost? What do I have to do? But more importantly, or no, just as importantly, what happens if I don't? Because as we just heard, there's a lot could go wrong. So we're still talking about it because it's more important than others. And I guess, Jason, we've had a few conversations in the past months, and what I love from talking to you is there's an equally important but different angle that you bring to the conversation.
Yeah, there is. There's another world out there for people with culture, and people with culture can be people who are migrants, refugees, First Nations people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and they make up billions of people who don't have ID, can't hold it, and are unable to verify themselves. And you know, one element that I have to face on a regular basis is whether I'm Aboriginal or not. And believe it or not, there are cases where I myself have gone through and have been rejected from a housing loan, from a business loan, from access from a scholarship at university, because the type of documentation I had to prove wasn't the type of documentation that they were asking for at that particular time. Or my skin shade wasn't dark enough in that particular time of identifying who I was. So this is the real world that many underdocumented people and underserved people live in regional and remote Australia and parts of the world where digitalisation or people transitioning to digital technology have never had the value of who they are transition across into the systems that are westernised and don't think entirely about the cultural value or the lives and communities that people live in outside of the digital realm or outside of the westernised systems. So it's critical that we get this right, and or else we're going to be in the same position we've been in and never be able to close the gap between mortality levels and unemployment, poor health, the list goes on.
So clearly haven't gotten it right yet, with some pretty significant impacts. When we think then about the important distinction as well from just digitising what we have today to moving to an actual digital identity and a digital identity ecosystem. Jason, maybe for you to start, thinking about what are those kind of ingredients, right? What are the building blocks we need to make sure it is an inclusive, robust, strong digital identity system? What are the bits we need to start adding in?
Yeah, I think that inclusivity is exactly what it's about. You know, the inclusivity of the other groups out there, the marginalised groups. They live in the physical world, and the physical world is not. They've been living in that world for so long that third-party services have been carrying all the work for them, and they've just been reliant and dependent on that. So we need to break that and ensure that people have digital self-determination, that they're able to digitally self-determine and move towards that, rather than just have community organisations and services self-determine for them on their behalf. This is an opportunity to recreate history and truly move people towards digital self-determination, so we can be on an inclusive ground and playing field as we move forward with financial management, with employment and credentials and verified Aboriginality identification. And these are real steps at the moment that are facing us around the referendum for the voice. How are voices being heard into the voice dialogue? Where is the treaty and identification for treaties? So there is quite a lot of work that still hasn't been done yet in this particular space that it directly relates to your organisations and how you identify or use identification and the risk of not getting the correct identification.
When what I touched on earlier, I think a key difference, we talk about identification and digital identity. Let's take a moment to talk about what that is. The 100-point ID, traditional approach, offline identity, whatever, the fidelity is rather large. You've got your driver's license, your photo, your passport, your Medicare, your other things, and they work well when you need to total 100 points of ID as simply as possible. That's not the world we live in now. We live in a world of high fidelity where digital identification is about verifying aspects of a person's identity, their attributes, that are smaller, their names, their contact details, their age or date of birth, their certifications, their background. It can go on and on and on. And digital identification is verification of those individual attributes. And so what is a model that works? If we think about what needs to be true for a digital identity ecosystem to succeed, there are three attributes. One is trust. And this is trust not only that the attributes are verified, the data is correct, but also that the overall ecosystem works. This is going to be gained not through some kind of golden use case that comes in and suddenly your identity is available for you to share and you've got visibility over who you shared it with and what they're doing with it. It's going to be incremental, smaller use cases that you run into day to day and making that easier. The second part is interoperability. We can't have some kind of a solution in Australia where customers or individuals have to self-navigate. If I'm dealing with this entity for this use case, I go down this path. If I deal with the other, I go down to the other. And at a really high level, and what we see internationally, is that interoperability between the public and private sector is a must. If there's distinction between how you interact, there just won't be the uptake and momentum, either for individuals to use or for businesses and relying parties to get on board with. And the third is, I guess, flexibility to scale. There are use cases and uses today for digital identity that we know about and problems that need to solve. There are a lot we don't. And whilst we are talking about it under the name of digital identity, what Jason's just described is not just digital. What is the intersect between the digital and offline identity? And that's where use cases will go in the future. So trust, interoperability, and flexibility to scale is really what a successful ecosystem would have.
So you started to touch on it a little bit as well, but so we're clearly playing catch up, right? But the goal is not to catch up. The goal is to leapfrog, right, and lead the world. Are there any examples you've seen? Nick, I'll start with you. Any examples you've seen on what looks good? We heard a little bit earlier in this room about Bank ID, but any overseas example of what good looks like, what bad looks like as well, or even the ugly? What can we learn overseas?
Okay, so I think first, we are having this conversation in the context of Australia. And 40 years, the national ID card has been discussed, and for 40 years, Australians have told us that's not what they're interested in. A federal mandate, government-mandated single identity won't work in Australia. So what are some other options that do? And I think that Bank ID in the Nordics is a fantastic example. For those who perhaps weren't at the session earlier, this is a bank-led consortium in the Nordics whereby customers have control over their data sharing and attributes for use in a whole lot of use cases, not just in banking, but in healthcare, telcos, and the government. And they've got a range of mediums in which they can participate. What we love about the example of Bank ID is that whilst it has been around for, I'm going to double my time frame now, I'm going to say nearer to 20 than 15 years. It really accelerated when government or public sector participation got involved. And the use cases could be simple authentication in the banking world, it could be digital signatures, it could be onboarding. 80%-ish of adoption across the markets, and of that, I think about 30-odd% is in the public sector. So what you've got there is a a digital identity scheme that is just part of everyday life. Similarly, I guess the other piece we look at and like is what's being done in Canada with Verify Me. So again, bank-led, but also with telco and federal and provincial government. Similar use cases, whether it be authentication, onboarding, step-up identity across telco, health, banking and public sector. It's, again, part of their everyday life. So success is not big one-off use cases. It is just, small incremental problems being solved here and there.
And Jason, I'd love your views on this as well, because Australia is certainly not the only country with an inclusivity challenge. When you think about others who are underserved, First Nations, migrants, refugees, where else do you see that sort of, again, opportunity to help or, I guess, learn?
I think that there's a real opportunity for getting the KYC right and looking at KYC for diversity and how the threats around anti-terrorism, modern day slavery, use of finances and funneling those finances into crime and organised crime around the world. I think that there is a missing element where those victims of those perpetrators are missed, and you have, just like we do have with family violence, the people escape without having their credentials in family violence situations, and in KYC you've got victims who are the people as slaves to the modern day to those sort of organised crime syndicates and so forth. So how do we create an ecosystem that looks at the full picture of KYC and also comes back around and supports the victims of KYC so that they don't return back into the same system and become perpetrators themselves or be trapped in that same environment? I think that's something we've been thinking about, and how do we create capabilities and capacity to break away from those environments. I think that there has been a group in Canada who's been leading the way with Canadian Inuits who have used identification as a way of voting, and uniquely with that particular Inuit tribe, so they could verify themselves according to their cultural and heritage backgrounds that could enable them to break away from poverty cycles as well and be fully inclusive of an environment that they can interact with and they value, rather than have barriers in place. There are also other places where the World Bank operates and is working towards identification, but I think that there's still opportunity for procurement to play a role in identification and be accountable to the compliance issues and risks that they face when they actually tender for contracts, whether it is in Australia where we've got the Indigenous procurement policy or diversity conditions, that they actually become more aware of the risks. I mean, we have had case studies in the Northern Territory of $100 million in Aboriginality fraud. In fact, companies have been convicted and have closed their doors, and reputation has been at risk with all sorts of other organisations that we know in Australia who have used particular plans and ways of working with underserved groups who were very vulnerable, but were forced into these unknown plans and things that actually caused greater grief to them and perpetuated poverty for them. So we have a responsibility, and the responsibility is those diversity conditions around procurement and human rights. So these are all out there already, but software has the ability to move faster into those spaces that haven't been filled.
I want to just follow that last thread and thinking about businesses as well, because we've sort of talked about individuals and they're clearly vital to any reform, any changes, making sure we're privacy preserving, customer centric. But for businesses, it's a real opportunity. So here we've lucky or unlucky to follow the session on breaches. But as the global leader, or certainly in 2022, global leader on cyber breaches, the opportunity for businesses to reform using digital identities is huge, right? So Nick, from a NAB point of view, supporting both sides of the fence, what do you hear from businesses? What do you hear is that sort of opportunity to minimize data or really transform the way they think about data and identity?
So at its core, obviously, digital identity is a data minimization play in the ecosystem over a point in time. And there is a discussion going on in our businesses more and more around customer data, what is nice to have and what is must have. And the line between nice to have and must have is changing over time. And for all the reasons why we're here today and all the trends that are happening, we think that it's going towards less data as must have and more data as quote unquote nice to have, and therefore how can we help solve? I guess there are two aspects driving that we're seeing. One is customers are more aware of how their data is being treated. And whilst, today they're starting to think about it and starting to act on it, ask questions, really make, purchasing and relationship decisions based on how safe their data is. When we look ahead into, hopefully, a future where a digital identity ecosystem is part of Australian life, it gives them the ability to act on, being really clear about the data they're sharing and what it's being used for and why, but also choosing not to share that data. So businesses who do that well will be, helped to win business. The other aspect is the larger regulatory framework. So the Privacy Act is going in its submission period at the moment and review period at the moment, and I am no way an expert on this space. However, the part of what is being discussed is small businesses. Where are they sitting in relation to the Privacy Act? And there is a future where they would fall under obligations within the Privacy Act, and correctly and securely handling customer data will become an obligation. And so anything that helps them do that better, more cheaply, more effectively is something that they'll be interested in understanding. So it is quite a nice situation where you've got both sides of the coin. We started talking out about customers because ultimately we all are individuals, but it's at least a two-sided ecosystem, if not more.
Jason, you must hear from businesses all the time thinking about how can they help use digital identity solutions to offer a wider set of services for their customers, for communities. What do you hear?
In fact, it's more what consumers are saying, what the users are saying. They've been locked out of making choices, making informed choices, and those organisations have constantly said that it's difficult to transfer credentials to individuals who don't hold electronic devices the same way everybody else does, like in Victoria, where you have a mobile phone and that's your phone for the next so many years. In these communities, many of these people pass their phones around and share them. It's a source of information and opportunity that they want to share and pass on to the next person, and they'll receive a new phone that isn't theirs, and they'll pass that on, and so on and so forth. I mean, this is how life is, but organisations, they're trying to remain compliant. They want to verify. They don't want to be one of the $100 million fraud companies. They want to actually do their part, but it's moving to a technology solution. In these environments, this is why it's a part of the Closing the Gap strategy, is because they haven't had that capability to move it into that environment. And only this year, it's now one of the milestones for Closing the Gaps is to move digital self-determination and digitalisation towards making informed choices for First Nations people as a Closing the Gap core requirement under the Commonwealth Government and state governments Closing the Gap strategy that they're all signed on to. So these organisations get funded by those governments, but they're wondering why is it that it's not. Why is it that we still don't have the ability to transfer this? And there are these cultural unknowns for them that haven't been solved yet. So that's why we exist. We exist to fill that gap for those organisations, to help them bring these missing pieces together. So it's quite a complex problem. It's been around a long, long time, but for First Nations people, it's been over 250 years that they haven't had ability to identify themselves in Australia.
So I'm getting to hurry up, unfortunately. So I'm gonna close, and then we'll see if we can squeeze in an audience question before I'm whipped off stage, or if there are any. So a couple of those kind of key ingredients when we're answering the exam question: trust, inclusivity, interoperability, choice, and flexibility as a sort of core building blocks. Any final thoughts on what businesses should be thinking about, why NAB are thinking about this, why Hold Access are thinking about this? Any final thoughts before I get us dragged off?
I won't be long. I guess you should be thinking about diversity conditions. What are they? What are your diversity conditions that your organisation and the businesses you work with are required to be accountable to? Because this is all happening right now globally through procurement and around the human rights towards technology, moving humanity first into technologies rather. So we need to be all thinking about how do we become more inclusive with technology and using it in a way that everyone has access to it.
I think from, NAB's point of view, this is something that we're taking very seriously. We see NAB has a role to play in helping the overall ecosystem succeed. A digital identity ecosystem we see, is an essential part of Australia's future, whether it be in helping a digital economy grow or helping to address the overall fraud and scam trends that we see. It's not a silver bullet. There's a lot that needs to be done, and it's beyond just banking, but we're happy and really excited about helping to be part of that conversation. Ultimately, this is about giving tools to both individuals and businesses to help them be accountable for their decisions. And if this is something that we talk about at conferences or around the dinner table more often in the future, people are going to be informed and have options. So it's exciting, as we heard earlier, session, it can be scary, but we're at the point of being able to, hopefully make some real impact here.
Folks, please join me in thanking Nick and Jason for joining us.